Hi, Dan Goodstein here. I head up media and events for the IRPA AI. I'm joined today by Danilo McGarry. He's a director for automation and RPA at UnitedHealth Group. Thanks for being with us, Danilo.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Glad to be here.
So you'll be speaking at a couple of our upcoming events, but I wanted to start the conversation here and give our members a sense of what you've done and what you are doing. But before we do that, maybe you could share a little bit of background on your role and your experience.
Sure. So I started doing automation really quite a long time ago, before it was called automation. So back in 2008, when I was in banking in Royal Bank of Canada, it was a hard time. A lot of people got laid off, and we seized an opportunity to really maintain the same level of service for our customers by having automation as a way to replace people while we're letting people go. It seems a little grim, but it was a good way to go. So it was really back in 2008 or 9 that I started looking at automation on a large scale in terms of processes, process improvement, process transformation, and digitization as well. And again, all of these words were didn't really exist back then. Everyone was talking about Six Sigma and Lean, etc.
Right.
Did that for about 6 years. Did some great work in Royal Bank of Canada. I became one of the youngest associate directors there in the company's history. It's a company over 100 years old. Then I decided to go on my own for a while. For about 3 years, I did a stint in Middle East, where I did a lot of consultancy for governments and for private companies, and working a lot again with innovation, with digital transformation. And after some time, just personal reasons brought me back to the UK, where I then got a chance to be the head of artificial intelligence and machine learning for Citigroup, which is the world's 13th largest financial services company. I went in, didn't have much going on. I had to set up that division almost from scratch, which, if you have to set up an AI division from scratch, is actually quite difficult, because you need to have quite a prominent RPA structure in place, and the innovation team has to be there. You have to have a development team, etc. So it was really quite interesting how, in the space of just a year, we really managed to deliver the first ever AI program for Citigroup. Which again, pretty renowned company. That grew very quickly to over 100 bots in total for the automation program. Made some significant savings for the bank, and got some really high level attention in the bank, even at board level. Then after some time, I had been in financial services already for over a decade. It just didn't. I wanted to do automation for something which had a greater good. I wanted to help people more in the space, because I started seeing more and more case studies around healthcare, how it could augment decisions of doctors, how it could help people in emergency situations, etc. Then I applied to UnitedHealth Group, which is the world's largest healthcare provider. Joined a great team there, with a lot of great work being done. We're having a global reach. We're making quite a huge difference in terms of healthcare, and making healthcare more available and cheaper for everybody. So that's something that gets me up in the morning every day. Knowing that the work that my program is doing and the team I'm working with is having a global ramification, a positive one as well.
Sure. Oh, great. Well, I want to ask you more about that, but I want to also ask you about your previous role. So that project that you mentioned around AI robotics at Citigroup. I find that scale is the biggest issue right now facing automation. How do you scale? How did you achieve such scale so quickly?
Yeah, it is a difficult thing. The theory can be there, but you do need a little bit of luck and good timing as well. Scale is really all about planning ahead of time. With a lot of RPA programs, you get so inundated with requests to automate things, and basically whoever screams the loudest gets your attention. But we were a little bit more thoughtful. We had quite a lot of careful planning prior to that as well. So I think some of the key successes to having to scaling quickly is, one, having a really strong reusability model. Trying to use the same or minimize the amount of vendors and platforms that you have. That way, no matter how many teams are building on that platform, you can reuse some of that code. So if you have a similar use case coming up next, you don't have to go back and do it from scratch. So you can deploy much quicker. There's a lot less risk involved, and you end up, kind of going to market to your clients with an automation much quicker and much easier with less risk. The other thing as well, which really helps, I think, is the company culture. If innovation is really being driven top down, and it's being seen as not as a threat to people's jobs, but a way to make people's jobs more interesting by taking away the mundane tasks. I think that really helps, if it's part of people's appraisals, if it's part of teams' goals to automate things. The other thing as well, which I think is quite key, is it allows companies to scale, is the ability to understand what your business is doing. In very large multinational businesses, it's very difficult to understand what everybody's doing. Yes. Because all the teams work in silos. They don't really talk to each other. They don't have to. So if you take a company like Citigroup or any other bank for that matter, JP Morgan, etc., you're in nearly 200 countries. You have 50 to 100 to 200,000 employees. So how do you understand what everybody's doing? So we had a very clever process in place in order to try to extract use cases from people. We had some very clever data analytics going on in terms of what everybody's doing from a day-to-day basis, what applications people are using on a day-to-day basis. And I think that analysis from the ground up really helped. And a lot of other RPA or automation programs I've seen, people just tend to wait for stakeholders to come forward. And it's really in the best hope that they're bringing you the best possible use case. But there's a massive issue there in terms of conflict of interest. One is, the people who are bringing you the use case, they might not be well educated on the subject. So they might be bringing you things which doesn't make any sense. Two is, once you have a certain book of work of things that have been brought to your team for automation, you're pressured to go forward with something. Otherwise, it becomes a waste of money, and your program, is no longer going to be green ROI, in terms of the investment the company has made. So a lot of groups, I find, they're pressured to go ahead and automate things, but it might not necessarily be the best use case. So the other very important ingredient is choosing the right use cases. Understanding that RPA and automation and AI in general, it's not the best solution for everything. You have to be a little humble about that, and you have to be honest in trying to take the best possible cases. And if you think, just to wrap up, if you think of a company that has, most banks in that case, thousands of systems they're using on a day-to-day basis, there must be something good to automate in that. So you just got to be you got to work smart, and you got to really understand what your business is doing and help drive that innovation and use and choice of use cases. The business does need a lot of hand-holding in that, no matter what business you're in.
So how important is speed, right? I mean, you scaled that very quickly, and on one hand, I assume that these are very sensitive and complicated systems, but on the other hand, competition around customer experience and differentiating, especially in financial services, healthcare, is very, very important, right? So how do you balance that?
Again, speed is about reusability and choosing the right use cases. So if you plan ahead and you think, well, I'm going to grow this is going to become a big program. You go back to the foundations and you think, well, I need to set the right foundations in place. And from day one, you start having a development team that's thinking about reusing its code in the future. So again, reusability is key. The other thing as well is, again, like I said, choosing the right use cases is huge, because rather than, trying to fit, a round hole into a square peg, square peg into a round hole, you're never going to get there. It's going to end up becoming a little bit of a disaster, a bit of a DIY situation. But if you pick the right use case, going from start to finish, it's much quicker, it's much easier, a lot less risky. So those two things I really can't stress, how important they are. And again, a little bit of preparation beforehand is key. I've seen a lot of automation teams just from friends and that I know that do this. You just rush into it. You try to automate things as fast as you can, so that you can show some value back to the business. But at the end of the day, sometimes the rabbit, the snail, does win the race. The turtle wins the race. You got to really be careful and understand what you're doing from day one, so that later on in your program, when you have 100+ robots, you're not trying to do everything possible to try to to keep the program alive. The program is keeping itself alive, and it's sustainable, and it can scale. So that's the thing. I see a lot of the speed element is more to do with getting it right, and then the speed will come naturally afterwards exponentially. The right choice of vendor as well is phenomenally important. And again, matching the right kind of vendor capabilities to the right use case is vital as well, because sometimes, again, you're going to try to, sometimes you might get an overcomplicated vendor or tool to automate a very simple process, and then you end up over-engineering something which is actually quite simple. So it's a number of things. I think if you shouldn't go for speed from day one. You should go for the right setup and infrastructure, and the speed will naturally come because you've built the right road for your journey.
So talk to me a little bit about legacy systems, right? So I'll never forget a conversation I had a couple of years ago with a very large institutional bank after one of our events. And the gentleman came over to me afterwards and said, this is all very nice, the early days of digital transformation. But when you're a 150-year-old bank and you're steeped in legacy, it's not so easy. If you were born digital, it's easy, right? But if you're trying to transition from legacy to a digital state, so to speak, with all these legacy systems, that's much more challenging. So is that something that you've encountered, and how did you overcome that? I mean, these are big companies, right? UnitedHealth, Citibank. So how do you combat that?
So that's actually one of the biggest problems. You hit the nail on the head there. Look, you can't, in an ideal world, before you automate anything, you would do a cleanup. You get rid of all the fat. You would reduce the 10,000 systems into 100 systems. You would build a purpose for all system that takes care of several business lines, so that you have the same code, you have the same upgrades happening at the same time, and everything is synchronized and beautifully put together. But in reality, it's not like that. Any medium to large size company is going to have 20, 30-year-old systems in place, mixed with brand new systems. And then you end up having an eclectic collection of different coding backgrounds, different translation tables, different types of data. So it's really it's a bit of a mess, to be honest. And no matter what company you go to, it's going to be the case. So the importance there is, whenever you take on a use case, the first thing that you need to be doing, it's one of the first things you need to be doing, is you need to look at what systems does this automation touch. And you need to plan ahead in getting the right access for your bots and for your group, in getting the right analysis done way up front, so that you don't get any surprises or change requests or change in scope, scope creep, as they call it, coming in when you're in UAT or when you're in production already. So again, careful planning, not racing into it, making sure that you understand all of the systems. And again, the other thing which I think is very key is making sure that your automation team has a very good relationship with all the different application owners. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to have a program that's going to be in place for a number of years, the likelihood is you're going to end up touching most systems in that company. So making sure you educate those application owners ahead of schedule, making sure that you understand each other from a point of knowing updates, when updates are coming for different systems. If they're legacy or not, you need to know that. And from a security point of view, data protection point of view, you need to be in sync with the application owners and knowing that, the bot is doing something safe. If it's not, then everybody needs to huddle up together and find a solution that is safe. So, it's not, legacy systems are a complication because of the way they are built, and they're usually not built for very high volume situation. So that's probably the only limitation I would say, which is very hard to get away from. In a legacy system, it has a certain limitations. No matter what you do, no matter how much communication you have up front, no matter how much testing you do, the system is not going to be able to cope with very large volumes. And then in that situation, then you need to sit down with more senior members of the company and make some suggestions in terms of changing that system. Again, long story, you have to do a migration. But if the automation is worth it, then sometimes there are cases where that happens.
Sure. So I want to ask you specifically about the customer experience side. Healthcare is obviously a very big business, but I would argue that most customers have sort of a love-hate relationship with the healthcare, certainly the insurance space. How do you see customer experience changing thanks to things like automation and AI?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's about education. Whenever something, if you look back in history, whenever something new has come along, there was always some protests. Whether it was a car, was a plane, whether it was a boat, whether it was electricity, there's always some sort of protest. And the media love to feed off the fear factor that robots have and that they bring. The theory of singularity, that bots will take over the world. But none of the stuff has materialized, and it won't, at least for a pretty long time. I think it's the same way that the world has transformed when you went back to, let's say, the 80s or the 90s, where social media didn't really exist. Nowadays you have people posting even what they eat online, posting where they're going, what gyms they go to. People are a lot more open or receptive to giving out information. And if you look at how much I'm talking about social media here because it does change the mindset of the current generation we have. So as people start understanding, look, companies need information to tailor make solutions for you, and if it's about your health, then what a better way to use information. Whereas with social media is to kind of show you what best perfume to show you. In healthcare, it's really about trying to predict what's going to happen to you next. What kind of checkups should you be having given your history, given your family history? So AI is extremely important in that aspect, and machine learning bit as well. And I think, again, it's about education. It's about giving the client that choice to share that information and explaining to them why that information is important. And again, it's an industry about that goes around trust. If you breach that trust that customers have by using that data to do something else, then they have more than enough reason not to give you that information. So it's a long process built on over time, over reputation, built on trust. But I think over time, as that education piece comes in, while you're building that reputation up with your clients and ensuring them that you're handling their data as seriously as anything else, I think they will start seeing that, and appreciating that this is really ultimately for the best. And it's ultimately for trying to drive down the cost of healthcare for them. Like the Dalai Lama says, we end up working our whole life to spend our health, and then we spend our health trying to get back. You spend everything you have trying to get your health back. It doesn't. I think over time, as people realize that this is for their own good, they will be more susceptible to it, and I think they will come to a point where they'll actually start sharing information freely. Whenever they have pain or something happens, they're going to let the healthcare companies know because it's in their best interest.
Yep, I agree. So, but AI is relatively new to most, and many of my members are seeing the value, but still trying to figure out the right use cases. Are there any particular use cases that that you're excited about?
In healthcare, there is so many. To be honest with you, we could be here all night. One thing that's very interesting is the use of AI. Again, it's a term that's used very loosely in the market. Everybody wants to say it's AI because it sounds more exciting. It sounds more futuristic. But ultimately, like I said before, you got to really pick the right technology for the right use case. Sometimes the solution is RPA, and it's not as sexy as saying that you have an AI solution. So what tends to happen then is use cases for AI tend to be more on the complicated side of things where you have multiple scenarios. It tends to be more on the wearable side. So, you have an ambulance, you have a nurse, or you have an emergency team. They're fitted with cameras. Cameras could be having facial recognition. So as soon as they come to the patient, they don't need to be even checking, their health card or their membership number. The camera automatically picks up who they are already and gives them the information they need. That stuff is very exciting. And that's all to do with facial recognition, which is a big part of AI. When you go to things such as call centers, when somebody's making a call and they need some help. Might even be emergency or it might not. We've done huge strides in the rest of the healthcare industry as well in terms of automating and helping make call centers more efficient, but not to the point where they're annoying, where to the point where they actually sound real. In banking, in many industries as well, chatbots has been a huge use, where you almost feel like you're talking to a real person. And that was really the turning point, where AI and machine learning managed to get to a point where there was enough data sets, enough data points to allow for that reality to come true, to allow for that realism to come to light. Whereas, when you go back to the more boring stuff to do with automating processes, internal processes inside a company, in a lot of cases, it's more to do with RPA, less so to do with AI. Because what tends to happen is you break down all of the different chunks of information and different paths that you could automate, and you make it a little simpler. To have AI being used for internal process automation successfully is quite a rare thing to happen, and no matter what company you're in. And I hear this all over different industries and different companies as well. So it depends where you are. It depends what the use case is. But different technologies will have different use cases and different ways of being used. And then there'll be situations where and this is the big point this year. I think this is going to be the talking point for this year, is how do you gel the RPA solutions to the AI solutions?
Yeah.
So that, let's say a medical service team is going out, it's recognizing the person's facial, doing facial recognition, it's telling the emergency services, the details about that client. But then what if the RPA process is already handling the payments in the background and getting all of that ready so that when they get to the hospital, the bill is already paid before they've already even arrived? Mm-hmm. So it's that merging of, the boring with the more exciting that is really going to make or break, automation teams and programs this year and next year, for the ones that have been in the game for longer. The ability for a team to gel those worlds together and merge them is going to be a huge synergy benefit for companies.
Yep. I agree with that as well. So my last question is about culture. You mentioned culture before and how it affects the innovation process. How do you influence this, especially when you're new to an organization like you are? How do you really influence the culture to really be conducive to the innovation?
My case is maybe a little rare. One of the things that really attracted me to UnitedHealth was the culture. If you look back in history, maybe United didn't have such a great reputation in terms of culture, but I can really say the last couple of years I've heard and I've felt it myself. Culture is such a huge part of day-to-day life at United, and when I saw that, I thought, okay, well, that's a huge chance and a huge win for me, because I'm going to be going into automation, and if the culture is right, if the culture is inviting for innovative ways of thinking, innovative ways of solving problems, then my job is going to be a lot easier. My team's job is going to be a lot easier. My boss's job is going to be a lot easier. So, it was, if I had, let's say, 10 companies, you could take some of the best companies in the world, and then I had United, and it's really not a promotion for United, it's really the truth. I would have picked United any day of the week because that culture is already there. Now, on the flip coin, so in terms of culture, I haven't had to do much. My team, of course, has had to constantly educate the stakeholders, has constantly had to educate seniors, because it is something new and everybody's learning. So nobody's a Mr. Know-it-all in this space. But if I compare it to the culture in other companies that I've been in, nothing wrong with their culture. It's the right fit for the industry that they're in. But automation really requires a culture of openness and a culture of being confident in your job, so that that if the company is automating what you're doing, that they're going to reskill you and they're going to replace you into another team, which needs your help, which needs slightly more cognitive power than just kind of copying and pasting and doing mundane tasks. So I think the most powerful part of culture that any company could benefit from, if they really want automation to be a huge success, is really the culture of showing their people that they come first, showing them a very clear roadmap ahead of time before they ever get approached by an automation team that, hey, look, you're going to help us save a chunk of money here and get better for our customers, provide a better service. And in return, we're going to upskill you. We're going to give you another job where you're going to be more excited to come to work every day. You're going to learn a new skill, which will add to your CV and make you a better professional. That part of culture, I think, is so important. And then the other part, just to wrap up, is the willingness and openness for people to embrace something new. Again, go back in history. Whenever humans see something different or something new, it's a bit like in sci-fi movies when you see aliens. The first instance or the first reaction is to attack because you feel threatened. And that's really a lot of cases with automation in many companies. You come to a team, and if the culture is not right in the company, they feel attacked. They don't want to share information.
Sure.
It ends up being a bit of a drag. You're trying to get information out of them because you need to automate something perfectly. But they don't give it to you because they're afraid of losing their job. So, if the company culture is not right, it can really hinder automation. It can really hinder AI, RPA, whatever you're using in terms of trying to improve a process. So, either way, you can have success as an automation team, but with the right company culture, that's when you kind of make triple-digit millions in savings. It's when you really kind of, you can really show the potential of automation. So, I wish that some companies could see that. It really has to come from the top down. I'm just lucky that I'm in a company that has that already and that really embraces that. We have amazing leaders who are always thinking innovatively. If you look at the future of healthcare, it's very powerfully driven by United, and they're constantly thinking about technology, drones delivering medicine, wearable AI solutions, better call centers, better chatbots. We're trying to do everything we can to make healthcare better.
Great. Danilo McGarry, thank you so much. We're looking forward to seeing you at our Oasis event coming up, and we can continue the conversation then.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.